Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. So today's video, we are going to be talking about the books that I have not finished. So if you're new to the bookish community, there is a term called DNF, and it stands for did not finish, and it basically just means any book that you have not finished to completion, whether that means you stopped halfway or stopped near the end or even just 50 pages in. You did not finish the book, and it's kind of, I think, something that started with like book blogging and book reviewing. I remember seeing it in my book blogging era and just seeing how kind of cool it was. I'm just very interested in books that people have DNF'd because there's always a reason behind why someone did not finish a book. And I think when I was younger, when I first started book blogging, I thought the term was very like foreign. I was like, oh my god, like people don't finish books? Like no. If I start a book, what's the point of reading it if I don't finish it? And that's like 100% true. But also, just because you didn't finish a book doesn't mean you didn't spend time, money, and effort reading it. So I wish we talked more about DNF'd books here on BookTube and just in the book community in general and kind of celebrated them as a milestone of like, hey, like we tried to read this book, it didn't vibe with us in some way or we weren't in the mood for it, but I DNF'd it, like say it loud and proud. So today I'm going to be exposing myself and sharing the books that I personally have DNF'd, and these are books that I have DNF'd in the past and I do not foresee myself getting back into them, or some of these I do, so I'll acknowledge that. But yeah, I just want to point out that this list may seem small, but it is not exhaustive because I am personally DNFing books on a weekly basis. I basically like stop in the middle of some of my books like throughout the week just because I'm not in the mood for it, because as a mood reader, I definitely think you'll understand the concept of DNF quite well. But I have put books down, but I've gotten back to them a few weeks later, so I usually just try to read a lot of books on my DNF list, but these are books that I just are on my list for a while. So without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so the first book that we have here is Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor. I think at this point I would just like to acknowledge and admit to myself that I am not a Laini Taylor fan, and I will not be reading any more of her books because every time I try to read them and every time I try to buy them, I just do not. I feel like I jinx myself because I have not liked her writing in the past, so I don't think I will be liking any of her future books. But anyway, I tried to read her Gods of Monsters, Dreams of Gods and Monsters series, and I bought the entire trilogy, did not finish it, and then there was a point in time where I had 2 copies of Strange the Dreamer. One of them was like a limited edition copy, and I was like, I thought that would pressure me into finishing this book, but it just did not. I think it even, like, it made me even worse, to be honest, because I felt so guilty. I couldn't get over the guilt. But essentially, I think the reason I just don't bode well with these books is because it's, first of all, it's YA fantasy, and I definitely feel like some fantasies are just so complicated that I personally, as a fantasy reader, I have to dedicate like 100% of my attention to the book, and my mind usually just wanders off, and if I'm not connecting all the way to the characters and the story of the book, it will lose me. So I feel like this is what happened many times with Strange Dreamer, where I just tried to read it and my mind just like wandered off to the point of like I had to reread like the pages before and the chapters before every time I would get back into it. So yeah, Strange Dreamer and we just don't click. I don't think we're made for each other, and that's fine. The next book is An Enchantment of Ravens by Margaret Rogerson. You will notice that I actually featured this in one of my recommendations posts a while ago, and that's because I believe if you've DNF'd a book, that doesn't mean you can't recommend it to someone else. I think a huge thing that a lot of people think, especially with like reading challenges becoming really important, or it seems to be the importance is placed on how many books you read, I think a lot of people tend to dismiss the pages that have contributed to that challenge. Like, I read quite a chunk of this book, and I think it was enough for me to know who would like it, but just not enough for me to like it myself. So personally, I did not like Enchantment of Ravens. I think this book fell into a lot of tropes that is used a lot in YA fantasy that I am just not a fan of, and personally it reminded me too much of a book that I just like already read. It felt like a story that I had already read. I know this is compared to Akatar a lot, but yeah, personally I did not like this book, but I definitely do think there is a fan base for this kind of atmospheric writing about the seasons. It's very autumnal. I think there's a huge crowd for that. So that being said, I did not finish this, but I don't think that this is a terrible book. It is not bad. I personally just didn't like it. Okay, perhaps the most controversial book in this video, Always and Forever by Laura Jean. I just don't think this is the finale that the people wanted. I don't know, is it just me? I know a lot of friends who also did not like the third book but kind of just finished it because they were like, oh, it's like the trilogy, like let's just finish it, whatever. I could not get through it. I think a lot of my issues with by the end of the second book, I was kind of just getting annoyed of Lara Jean and Peter and like their relationship, which they were very young, of course, and I think I really did love the movies because they were very like real, but I think the book just like, it was too annoying for me. I just could not get through like the lack of communication between Peter and Lara, and overall, I just do wish that I had finished this book because I would, of course, like to wrap up this trilogy in a tiny, neat little bow. But I think I just read some spoilers after I like DNF'd it, and I spoiled myself for the entire thing, and I know what's happening in the end already, so it kind of feels like I read it already. I think I just won't bother with the book anymore. Another YA fantasy that we have here is The Darkest Minds by Alexandra Bracken. I actually don't know if this falls more in like science fiction-y, or I know it's definitely dystopian, but this is just another YA dystopian or early YA book. I think this was definitely among one of those that like have been embedded in our community's history. I just didn't click with, and I think that's because I read this later than everyone else. After the movie came out, I watched the movie first. Probably a bad idea, don't do that. And then I read the book, and I just felt like the book was like not as like vibrant as the movie. I felt like the characters fell flat for me in the book, whereas like I love the characters in the movie, and I think I watched it on an airplane. So like, especially with movies you watch in the airplane, I just feel like I was doing anything I could to distract myself from the fact that I was on a plane. So I like intensely watched this movie, and then I was like, oh wait, the movie's like actually pretty good, like let me read the book. And I think the concept of this series is so cool, but again, I think it plays on a very prominent like YA trope that's like been done before and been reused, and I think I've read this type of like concept before in like a adult fantasy that just did it better. So again, not interested in The Darkest Minds, which is sad because I have like the entire trilogy like haunting me in my bookshelf. Okay, the next book we have is another Alex Bracken book, but this time I'm like not sad that I didn't finish this book, and it is Lore by Alex Bracken. I'm going to refer to a fellow booktuber's review of this book because I think that their review is more poignant and very introspective. Like, this book was just not it, and this book kind of had the formula of everything that I would enjoy in a book. It was like a big book, it was fantasy, it was Greek mythology, there was a lot of action behind it, and there's like a female heroine, and I just did not love it. I think the writing was definitely like, it just fell flat for me, and I didn't enjoy the characters because of that. But I also think, especially with Greek mythology, I think I've just read so many books with Greek mythology, and there's so many that exist out there that it's really, there's so much you could do with it, and I feel like this book just kind of fell into some tropes of like what we know, and like the tropes of Greek mythology and the not stereotypes really, but for that reason I didn't like this book, and it's sad. It is quite sad because I did read like the book halfway through, so I was so close to the end, so close, but I could not. The characters were so annoying, the writing was not it, and so I put it down. Okay, so don't lie to me for this next one. I know there was a point in time where everyone tried to read this book, especially if you were here in like 2016. I tried reading this book in 2016. It's The Martian by Andy Weir. I tried reading it in 2016 because I wanted to be a cool science-y person. I wanted to get along with the times and be like, yeah, I read this book that is just so complicated and very confusing, and maybe that's because I read it as a 16-year-old and did not acknowledge the other types of genres out there, because I was reading primarily like YA fantasy and dystopia books, whereas I feel like this one is very like sci-fi-esque, but also kind of rooted in like in like science. I had not read a book like that before. I would definitely try this again. I think knowing what I know and feeling a lot more immersed in like the science world. I am a STEM major, so I think I would pretty much enjoy this now. But yeah, I remember there's a time where everyone like read this book and I felt really left out. Okay everyone, learn from me, but this is why you don't buy like limited edition copies of books before you've actually read the book. So the next book I have is The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern, and as you can see, this is like the most gorgeous copy, the most gorgeous specimen of a book. It has like the sprayed edges, it's a beautiful book wrapping, but also like look at these end pages. Like, I spent so much money. I think I spent like an entire day's worth of like paycheck on this because it's also from the UK, so I pay like a fuck ton in shipping. This is The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. I assumed I would like really love this book because of how much I enjoy The Night Circus, and I think that's where these books very much differ. I think her writing is pretty similar in these two books, and I quite like the writing in The Night Circus. I think sometimes I didn't vibe with it, but I think what really hooked me for The Night Circus was the story of these two like apprentice magicians. And I really like that, and I was able to stay connected enough with the characters and their love story to stay in that book. But for this book, I just could not understand the plot. A synopsis has escaped my mind. I could not tell you what this book is about if my life depended on it. And I know it includes books though. I've seen this on a bunch of lists about books that like talk about books, I believe. But overall, I just could not get through the writing of this book, and I felt like it felt very different. It kind of took me out of like the assumptions I had with The Night Circus, and I think that's like obvious because this book was written like years after The Night Circus. I would really like to try again though. I said I wouldn't try again with any of these books, but I just cannot justify the amount I paid for this book. It still like haunts me from my bookshelf. Like I have to hide it behind like 2 layers of books so that I am not like kept up by this like beautiful book. And I really would like to like show this more in videos because it is quite like beautiful to look at. But just yet again, I could not get through it. Please do not hate me. I have The City of Brass here. I am always recommended this book, and I think people are really genuine when they give me those recommendations because I love these kind of books. Like I'm reading The Jasmine Throne right now by Natasha, which I feel like is very similar in the terms of like the way the atmosphere is described and the action scenes of it, and I feel like I would definitely love this book if I revisited it. I think when I first read this book, I think the very first scene or one of the very first scenes is rooted in a lot of action, and I think I was just missing that background and exposition that I need in like the first 50 pages, to get me into a fantasy world, and I think I just wasn't having that, so I put it down because I was very confused and I wasn't enjoying it as much. And I feel like for this book specifically, especially with fantasies, I don't read in very large sprints. I read in very small sprints of like 70 pages or 100. I know that's like really large for some people, but a lot of people, like my partner, reads in like sprints of 200. So if I am not like hooked enough to be like the next time I put down the book I want to get back into it, I just won't end up picking it up. Like I'm not going to waste my time on a book that I'm not excited to go back to if there are other books that I am waiting to read. Okay, and the final book we have here is Girls of Paper and Fire, another book that I read, or I first read in 2016 when I first started becoming more like prominent in the book community, where I was like more active. And I think this book specifically, I think it was one of the first kind of YA fantasies that I had read with like a sapphic character or a sapphic romance. And I think knowing what I know now, and after coming out as bisexual a few years ago, I have been kind of seeking out books with LGBTQ+ characters, and I think especially in fantasy books. And so if I were to revisit this now, I think I would definitely really love it. I also remember aspects of me not liking the writing, but I think reading more fantasy now, I would also enjoy the writing. And I don't know if you can tell, if you can see the post-its, but I actually got pretty far in this book. I got like more than 2/3 of the way in, and I don't know what prompted me to stop, but I would like to revisit this book. So those were all the books that I have DNF'd before. Like I said, it's not like a huge list, but I do DNF books quite often, and I will just kind of revisit them in the future. Let me know in the comments if there are any books that you have DNF'd as well. I'm very, very interested, and also just let me know like why you DNF'd it. Not that you have to justify it, but I love knowing people's reasons, because we're all very different readers and I embrace that. So yeah, thanks for watching this video, and I will see you on my next one. Bye.